Hi everybody, but we're back with Module 4. In this module, we're going to go over heart rate variability and actually go through an entire file to understand how to run the analysis, as well as how to make any adjustments that we would need to in the course of analysis. And finally, I'll touch on editing notes here again, even though it was covered in Module 3, which is the last module. Note that I've covered that information in that past one, but I do have the editing notes now, and I will make a couple adjustments, just inserting some of the editing information here. So let's go ahead and get started. We're just going to bring up the program first off. I've got my file already taken from this folder up here. I'm going to start with file 140. I've already put the start and the end times in there. You just want to double check your calibration settings. As we know from the training session, these are the parameters that we're looking at for the spectral analysis. And I'm not going to be pulling from an editing file right now. We'll just go ahead and get started. So this will be marked as 01, and this will be the first segment, which corresponds to the baseline in the eating comfort study. So as you see, we have all blue marks so far, which basically designates that we don't really have any problems with this section. I'm going to scroll through some sections here and just note that we have a small yellow point here. This is what's called this is a classic case of what's called an ectopic beat. These ectopic beats or ectobeats are basically small adjustments within the heart. They're natural physiological variability rather than anything to be concerned about as far as editing goes. This particular file has quite a few ectopic beats, and I'm hoping to provide a number of examples to just show when and how to get past those issues. Again, this is not a particular issue to worry about because this is just natural physiology. So that in this case, this yellow star is basically not of interest to you. In this case, we do have some editing to do. So go ahead and go in here and take a look. Just want to note here, first off, that this point in the middle here is an ectopic beat. However, when we look at this case, we'll see that this, in fact, is not. This is a mismarking on the sake of the algorithm. You can just go in here and grab F1, delete. We'll go ahead and turn snap to peak off and mid beat off as well. Grab our cross and go ahead and delete. We'll press OK. I suggest going in and out of the program to edit every adjustment that you're looking to do, at least within every small portion. Here we see another case where we have 4 additional stars in addition to the 3 R spikes here. We'll just go ahead and delete the stars if they're not of interest to us, and then we see that we have just these 2 stars left. Now this is a fairly decent gap. However, to me it doesn't seem likely that this is an issue that needs to be mid-beated. In other words, it doesn't seem like it's a big enough gap. It in fact just seems like the heart is resetting itself. But one way to check this is to go ahead and move your X cursors to where the valid R spikes are, or fairly close, and then kind of do some measuring. So we see that one before it's fine. This one seems to match up pretty close. And if the R spikes did match up, or you did assume that there would be a mid-beat here, this would be more likely in the middle. Now you'll note that on the other side, the IBI is much smaller. In other words, the heartbeats the R spikes are closer together. We can also make that adjustment and take a look. Just pull our data this way using the hand. And here we see that it is, in fact, much closer to a mid-beat. This could potentially go either way. However, when we go ahead and mid-beat this, we'll see that we still have a yellow star, which suggests that it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need a mid-beat. For this reason, I'm actually going to leave it without a mid-beat. We'll leave that there. And one other thing to check really quick is this RSA feature down in the corner here. You'll see that in segment 2, we had 7.4, and this one we have 8.6. And then moving forward, we have 6.9. We can go in here and make the adjustment and see if the mid-beat works out or not, and potentially bring our score down to an average closer. And in fact, it does. So with that being the case, it seems more accurate actually to leave that mid-beat, contrary to what I just said. So we'll go ahead and move forward with that. In the fourth segment, we have an ectopic beat, nothing to worry about. And the same in the fifth segment. It looks like we have 3 different ectopic beats. It might be worth your time to go ahead and look in and see if this ectopic beat is kind of out of the ordinary or not. However, I've already gone through this file for the most part and seen that these are all ectopic beats. So once you've done that, you can kind of just click through. You'll note that we go back to the first segment, and that completes the baseline section. From here, you could go ahead and automatically write the segments by just clicking first on segment 1 and then just clicking write. It'll create new, and then you just can continue to move through the file, automatically writing all of these segments. Of course, in the background, an Excel sheet will pop up and automatically write all this information. Unfortunately, my computer doesn't have the right version of Excel, so it's outputting, but it's actually not outputting to a file. You'll see when you do this process on your own computer, or when you're on your computer, that this will function properly. One thing I do want to mention right now, quick, is just to make sure that we take care of the editing notes that we have here. Since we did mid-beat in the third segment, it's worth your time to come up here and just click that in there, or put that mid-beat in there. Now, because that was an artifact, we can basically come in here and mark this in the artifact column as 1, and you'll note that at the bottom, the summation of all the artifacts will let the person doing comparisons at the end of the analysis know how many artifacts there are within that file. As long as there's under 10% of artifacts throughout the file, we'll be able to keep that file. So moving on, we're going to go ahead and go straight to the next file. We can save our editing notes here as 01, which designates that this is the editing file for the baseline segment. Go ahead and change our times. Okay, and here we can turn our editing file off. It doesn't make a difference either way because you're going to save it as a different file. The only other thing, you just want to make sure your segment time is still at 60, and go ahead and analyze. Here we see we have more ectopic beats. Again, I'm going to move swiftly through these the ecto beats just for the fact that it'll help us save a little bit of time in the long run. Again, more ectopic beats. Might be worth, again, looking in at these if you have any questions. But again, having gone over this file already, I know that there's several of these ectopic beats that we really don't need to worry about. Okay. And from there, we can see that the entire true social stress test portion, which is 11 segments long, you can see right here, it all seems fine. There weren't any adjustments that needed to be made, so you can just go ahead and automatically, or you can manually write, just again by clicking through these segments and clicking write, or you can come out and actually choose the auto analyze feature. In this feature, you basically click on this auto analyze all segments. You'll reinsert your end time, which is right here. Make sure you click off, and if you did have any edits that you need made, you need to make sure that the editing file is correct. You'll come back into Events and Modes, and then click Analyze. It'll ask you if it's inverted, and then you can create new. And then it'll automatically go through all the segments for you, writing those in the actual spreadsheet. You'll just need to wait for all the segments to complete. And this auto analyze feature will be most useful within this true social stress test portion for every experiment, just for the fact that there's 11 files to write. You can go ahead and click Done, and that file will automatically output. You'll see here that if those numbers did write, they would have written right to this. It would automatically saved, and you can just go ahead and click out. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move to the third portion here. It might help to recognize here that it is frequent that research assistants mess these numbers up. So just make sure that you double check these numbers to make sure that you have the correct ones. Looks like we do. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and scroll through these options here, or these segments here as well. In this section, there's only 3, really just looking at the recovery of the church social stress test period. It doesn't look like we have any other issues besides these ectopic beats, and we can take a look at those, but from previous experience, we know what's going on here. You go ahead and automatically write those, just like the last time, either auto-analyze or manually, and then go ahead and move towards the next section. Okay, in this portion of the data, we notice that we do have some issues here. The first issue here is obviously this one, and the second is we have some ectopic beats again. We'll ignore the ectopic beats for now and go ahead and focus here on this portion of the data. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that in this particular instance, you can eradicate any portion of the data before the initial R spike. And once the initial R spike is valid, everything after is also valid. So in this case, you can go ahead, delete the data for this early portion of the segment, and press OK. You note that the IBI row here completely flattens out, and our RSA returns to a relatively normal measure. You note that from before, our RSA was roughly around 7, and in this case it's also 7.1 after we make those adjustments. So we'll go ahead and say that this is actually a valid segment, even though this first 10 seconds or so of the data is omitted. And this is for the big reason, obviously, is that the initial R spike here designates that everything else is valid afterwards and everything else before is deleted. This is okay as long as you have 30 seconds of valid data within any given, 30 seconds of consecutive ECG data within any given segment. In circumstances like this, it's always helpful to come back to your editing notes and simply just mark questionable. This helps the person doing the comparisons know that there's something a bit fishy about this particular segment. And in case that not everybody is using the same logic to do the analyses, you'll be able to diagnose which circumstances are a little bit more unusual compared to others. These are very rare instances, and I chose this one particularly because it is a little bit confusing. However, it's pretty straightforward that the first R spike diagnoses the valid data afterwards. So we can go ahead and move to the next segment. We have a similar situation here. In this circumstance, we can go ahead and zoom in on our data, and we'll actually go ahead and delete this data as well. We can do this either by using F1 to manually delete all of these, or you can come up here and use the delete all between X cursors. That deletes all the data that was marked between here, and click OK. You see that again the IBI flattens out, the RSA becomes closer to 7. We still have a little bit of editing yet to do here, and this can be done simply by erasing these extra points. We see here that there's really no reason why these should be valid points. They're not R spikes, so we just need to go ahead and make those adjustments. We'll come back in, take a look at this last little bit of data. And we see in this circumstance, it's pretty clear that this is a valid R spike. In this circumstance, we'll go ahead and give it a try and see what happens here. We can use our snap to peak feature, automatically marks the R spike there. Okay, so in this circumstance, it does seem to drastically reduce the RSA. You know, before that it was 7 and now it's 3.66. Kind of look around and see that, well, the last one was 7, the ones after it is 8. This is a bit of a tricky segment. So it doesn't look like this is valid, but we'll go ahead and make this last adjustment here regardless. So the one thing that's out of the ordinary here is this R spike. Although it initially seems like an R spike, you'll note that it really it jumps up pretty drastically in comparison with the other R spikes around it. So this suggests that it might be an artifact. It's best to get rid of any of these kind of issues, especially if you have valid R spikes around it. You can go ahead and just mid-beat that with the snap to peak feature off and press OK. Note that it didn't really make a difference in RSA, but this is really to me this seems valid, at least from a visual perspective. We'll just go back to our notes and again mark questionable because not only is the RSA off relative to the segments around it, but there's also this, this good portion of the data that we're calling into question. Okay, so moving on to the third segment here, we see that we have more ectopic beats. We'll go ahead and ignore those for the time being and move towards this fourth segment. Here we can zoom in on the data and see that we have a number of issues and some relatively confusing circumstances here. First thing we want to do is take care of the easy stuff. We see that there was an extra R spike there that was marked. Go ahead and just delete that and then insert. Go ahead and insert what was initially deleted. From there, I can actually go back in and we can handle this a couple different ways. Initially, I thought it was a good idea to go ahead and try to save as much of the data as we could. We can do this by trying to delete those that we don't think are valid. The issue with that is that it's sometimes a little bit difficult to diagnose which ones are valid and which ones aren't. To me, it's pretty obvious that this is a valid R spike simply based on the distance between the R spikes over here, and the fact that you can move them forward and see that this is awfully close to what a valid R spike would be. However, we don't really see the QRS complex here, calling into question whether or not that data is valid or not. We can move forward with the assumption that perhaps it is, and see if we can mid-beat this extra point in here. In that case, we see that although there is one yellow star left, that the mid-beat did erase one of the yellow stars over here. Now, this is still somewhat questionable, and to me, it's mostly questionable because you don't see any valid QRS complexes here in this section. And because this would require kind of two questionable data points in a row, or two questionable R spikes in a row, I think the best way to move forward with this is actually delete all the data at the end of this segment, which can be done simply because it's at the end. If it were in the middle, it would be a different circumstance. Go ahead and press OK. We note that the IBI is flattened out, and we have RSA of about 5.7. So in this case, well, I would go ahead and approach it like that. Now, if it was in the middle, it would be a very different story. You wouldn't be able to delete all the data before or after. In that circumstance, you'd have to try to see if you could mid-beat one between two valid R points, and if you couldn't, you would have to mark that segment as as unusable. We'll go ahead and move forward again. In this circumstance, we just have to delete that. All the other R spikes seem valid. And look here, and we see that's just an actopy. With that said, you can go ahead and just want to go back and make sure that everything else is good. Again, it might be helpful to just mark section 4 here as questionable, so then we know later on. You can go ahead and manually write these or auto-analyze them. I'll go ahead and skip forward, and then you want to save that section in the editing notes. So we'll go ahead and just do this last little bit here. Okay, so in this last section, we do have a number of ectopic beats in the first and second. We can see after all the 5 are completed that we really don't have any adjustments to make. You can either automatically or manually write all these data points, and they'll go to your Excel sheet and they'll automatically save. Okay, so we made it all the way through that initial file with a number of things that I pointed out. I'm going to briefly visit 2 other files and point out the concepts of packet drops as well as endpoints. So we'll go up here and just pull from our next file. And the information that I'm going to need is actually from the second portion of this data. So we'll pull from this 16.4. And scroll through this data and see, I believe here on 19th. Indeed. So here we see that there are a number of issues. Again, we'll go here and look at this case. This is the perfect instance of what's called a packet drop. Basically what the issue is that the hardware was not corresponding to the software's, not communicating properly to the software. And for that reason, there basically was a missed R spike, or a missed beat that wasn't characterized within the data. We can make these, so first off, this is very, very frequent, especially in some data that is not sampled properly. In this particular data set, I've only come across a few so far, which suggests that they should be pretty prevalent throughout the data. These are adjustments that can be made at a later time, but for the time being, we simply have to mid-beat these. So it's important that snap to peak is off when you try to mid-beat these circumstances, otherwise it'll try to attach it to a point that's really not at the center. You can just go ahead and click mid-beat and click OK. You see that the IBI flattens out, and you have a mid-beat that was automatically imputed in here. Go ahead and look at these other circumstances, and these are a perfect case of more packet drops. In this circumstance, you just need to go ahead and delete these extra points, and then move your X cursors to go ahead and mid-beat these. Note that if there was 2 openings in a row or 2 missed beats in a row, that data would not be salvageable because you can't mid-beat 2 in a row, obviously. So in these circumstances, it's pretty straightforward. You just add 3 mid-beats. You go back to your data, you go back to your editing notes at that point, and assuming that this, for instance, is the actual data point, you can just go in there, copy and paste that mid-beat point in there, and then just click or type in 3 mid-beats so that we know that there was 3 different mid-beats. Click in this artifact column and just add 3. So that's how you'd mark your editing notes for any more than 1 mid-beat within a given segment. So I'm going to move back to my next file and not even save that editing file. We'll go ahead and take a look at our last instance quick. Okay, 1889.2. and in this case we're going to look at what's called endpoints. So in this particular segment, we see here that we have a blue dot here and a blue dot here. This blue dot causes a yellow star to arise here. We can go ahead and get rid of that simply by zooming in on the data here and trying to delete this point. Now note that all blue points are supposed to mark the top of R spikes, and this is clearly not an R spike. This is perhaps a Q or just the end of a Q. So we just simply want to eradicate that point and then click OK. We can come to the other side of the data, and this is somewhat a bit more debatable just for the fact that this perhaps could be an R spike. However, since it's not perfectly clear, we just want to go ahead and get rid of it anyways. Note that the data won't count if it's at the end or the beginning. It only goes between the first and last valid R spikes. So in the circumstance where this is a little bit closer, we would not want that to affect our RSA measurement. Just go ahead and click OK, and you see that it flattened out and it changed the RSA just a little bit. You can go ahead and mark this in the editing notes. Again, we'll just assume that this segment right here is the one we're looking to mark. And you can come in here and just go ahead and click endpoint. And because we marked two different endpoints, we're going to go ahead and mark in two. If you only adjusted one, you would mark that here just as EP. And there's no need to mark that in the artifact column. It's simply just an issue of marking it here so that we know that there's a difference. Okay, so that's the end of this portion of the module. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to Brandon, Emily, or Eddie.